few years ago when I was at DragonCon, I was asked to speak about Stargate at one of the Stargate tracks, and specifically about mythology in Stargate. And in the few years that have followed that, many times people have asked me if I would present that again in another way. And so after much delay, I'm presenting to you here a 3-part series on mythology in Stargate. The first part will be on the idea of rational primitive man in Stargate. The second part will be specifically about Norse mythology in Stargate. And the third part will be even more specifically about the idea of Ragnarok from Norse mythology in Stargate. So, as I told them at DragonCon, we've long attempted to work out these relationships between myth, religion, and science. So, one good example of this is the prose Edda, written in the 13th century by Snorri Sturluson. And Snorri really tries to reconcile the Norse myths, which were the modern myths to him, his contemporary, the Christian beliefs that were contemporary with him, with the ancient Norse myths. And Snorri, when he does that, he doesn't try to deny that figures like Thor and Odin really exist, but he instead suggests that they were, in ancient times, great and powerful kings who were skilled at magic. And so eventually, as time went on, legends grew about them until they became known as gods. Now, Snorri could have denied as a Christian that there ever was a Thor, there ever was a Loki, there ever was an Odin, that those were ever figures. But he doesn't. Instead, he argues that we've misunderstood who they are. In other words, according to Snorri, myth is not built on falsehood. Instead, myth is based on truth that was misunderstood before his more enlightened era. Now, the Stargate franchise does much the same thing as Snorri Sturluson did in the Edda so many centuries ago, except it substitutes science and technology for religion. Ancient myths are assumed to be true. The fantastical elements are not imaginations or inventions of the imaginations of our ancestors. Rather, they are really the best understanding our ancestors could have had of their experiences. Now, this goes beyond mere plot device to discover and explain similarities between Earth and other human cultures. The writers of Stargate explore this understanding of myth to create a dramatic tension. And so I want to explore the Asgard, the ways in which Stargate exploits Norse mythology to create a heightened dramatic tension and a sense that humanity may, after all, be doomed. But first, I think it would be instructive to go over some of the ways in which modern thinkers have considered this relationship between myth and science, or more commonly between myth, religion, and science. So Edward Burnett Tylor, who's one of the 19th century pioneers of anthropology, he used a model that is closest to the worldview depicted in Stargate. And although his views are generally considered outdated for students of culture today, they do offer fertile ground for the Stargate SG-1 writers. So first, it's important to understand that E.B. Tylor considered primitive man to be a rational being. So therefore, primitive man came to false beliefs because of faulty reasoning, not because they failed to reason. In other words, primitive religion is logical if false. In the original film Stargate, we learn that the primitive Egyptian religious beliefs were not irrational, but were indeed a logical understanding of their experiences. Beings with supernatural seeming powers claimed to be gods and were accepted as they presented themselves. Indeed, for the ancient Egyptians to come to some other beliefs, such as, for example, that Ra was a super advanced alien masquerading as a god, would have been illogical. The same is true of people living on the other planet, Abydos. They accept Ra as a god until they have evidence suggesting otherwise, and then they abandon their previous beliefs as illogical. So for Tylor, myth and science are at odds, and man naturally progresses through 3 stages. Primitive religion, which for my purposes here I'm just going to call myth, which gives way to modern religion and science. And modern religion, in Tylor's view, is basically metaphysics and ethics, and so it deals with the spiritual world, not the physical world. Science, on the other hand, deals with the physical world. As primitive man reasons, at first, he sees no division between the spiritual and physical world. The physical world is all. But then eventually, from viewing dead bodies, seeing people sleeping, considering his own dreams that he has at night, primitive man reasons that he must have a soul. And from there, he reasons that then others must have souls as well, and then eventually animals must have souls, plants and trees must have souls, and finally inanimate objects have souls. So then eventually, though, his observations cause primitive man to discern that maybe objects don't have souls, and from there work backward until there is no spiritual cause for physical things. So basically, Tyler imagines that we start off like animals, seeing only the physical world, and then we begin through reason to go, well, I must have a soul, and therefore they must have souls, and everything, ultimately everything has souls, but then further reason back and go, well, I don't think this rock has a soul, and so maybe a tree doesn't have a soul, and all the way back until we return just to a material, physical world. Modern philosophy, then, in Tyler's view, is divided into modern religion, which deals strictly with ethical and metaphysical concerns, and modern science, which deals with physical concerns. And of these, in Tyler's view, science is the more important. So the view of man that's presented in the original Stargate film and the various series fits well with Tyler's view. Primitive man, as seen in the ancient Egyptians and the Abydonians, see the physical world as being caused by the supernatural world. And such belief is rational, given the knowledge they have. Space travel, incredibly destructive weapons, and immortality are reasonably viewed as divine power. The Abydonians are unable to progress beyond these false beliefs because the constant presence of Ra there, who's always reasserting his divine status. So in part 2, we'll move from this to talk specifically about the role of Norse mythology in all this.